rightly points out that there is so much more we need to do to match education opportunities to the magnitude, to the range of gifts which demand more options in how we go about developing well-educated, active citizens rather than excluding or marginalizing or in other ways devaluing citizens since they do not fit into the traditional liberal arts education frame of becoming an educated, productive person. The human rights impetus in VTE is making sure that just like we use standards to demand as well as assure quality in teaching, quality in curriculum design and implementation, quality in job preparation, quality in placement for those in traditional university tracks. The same goes for those in VTE. This means assuring that VTE students receive quality, up-to-date education and are able to retool and otherwise update at low or no cost, given the much more rapid need to retool in VTE fields than in traditional, more theory and non-practical liberal arts fields. And it also means having labor policies and incentives in place which assure that VTE students have access to viable employment promotion opportunities, decent compensation and fringe benefits support, such as health insurance and tuition support for themselves and for their immediate families. Access without gainful use of skills and sustained quality of life means at best short-term security with long-term quality of life uncertainty and certainly thus possible destabilization. There is yet another human rights matter when we think about VTE, the same way we think about traditional university education. Namely, it is the need for designers and those who apply VTE sector and institutional policies to understand our need to not only be concerned about the healthy and about the wealthy among us, but also being concerned about what it is that we do in societies which are coarsely divided and even culturally and socially devastated societies, to realize that in the course of rebuilding into genuine, viable democracies, apart from historical societies of discrimination and exclusion, it is imperative that societal elites be concerned with segments of society who have been subjected to en masse devastation, such as genocide and slavery, or just being ignored, invisible, such as favela people in Brazil, and the urban and rural white, black, and other non-white, poor and very poor in America. When genocide, when slavery, when mass rape, when natural disasters occur, and routine ignoring the poor occur, needless to say, one of the first things which occurs afterwards is that everyone, especially those without before the devastation, are left with even less resources than they had before. Just like in the case of rebuilding traditional universities in post-slavery societies, in post-genocide societies, and even in post-natural disaster societies, and in post-chronic impoverished societies, there is the even more pressing need to rebuild, or for the first time, build VTE sectors and institutions to assist those who are even more impoverished, especially if they have not the test scores or the interest or the finances in going to traditional university. Take, for instance, what I've been learning as serving presently while in Rwanda as a strategic advisor to the government, as I observe and experience the ambitions of the remarkable Rwandan government and civil society leaders, which have made such incredible strides of building an inclusive democracy since the 1994 Hutu extremist genocide against the Tutsis, which exterminated at least 10% of the nation's population, heading up to about 2 million people who were slaughtered in 100 days in 1994. In the 2020 Rwanda Vision Plan, the goal is to make the Rwanda economy by the year 2020 knowledge-based, with a thriving middle class, with drastically reduction dependence on external donor aid. The country is now the most secure in East and Central Africa and is considered as a hotspot for business investment. In terms of the United Nations measures, Rwanda is one of the top 3 countries in the world when it comes to food security. It is the most politically empowered country in the public sphere when it comes to gender. 56% of parliament in Rwanda are women. In the past 5 years, the poverty rate has dramatically decreased through homegrown initiatives, such as the one call per family policy. Believing that the country cannot be reconciled along ethnic lines without meeting needs of hunger, employment, and housing, in recent years, the government has turned to not only expanding the traditional education sector, but has put even more investment in developing a viable VTE sector, symbolized through the establishment of the first major American research university on African soil in Rwanda, the prestigious Carnegie Mellon University Rwanda, which is in the same class of high-tech American universities such as Caltech and MIT. The VTE policy thinking involves assuring that VTE education is of the highest quality, and like in the case of South Africa, VTE students, if need be, can easily cross over into traditional university education preparation tracks upon meeting admission qualifications. Most importantly, there is a recognition of tutoring, counseling, job preparation, and job placement of genocide victim survivors. One of the interesting examples of this is a conscious decision to build VTE facilities within easy reach of communities built to address the housing needs of victim survivors. What needs to be improved on in the Rwandan VTE and traditional university sector cases, as well as in Brazil, India, South Africa, and other countries, including the United States, with such deep cultural divides, and which have experienced en masse catastrophic, historically speaking, such as colonialism, slavery, genocide, and the chronic poverty of the slum, the ghetto, and favela, is moving beyond the voluntaristic sense of what it takes to bring about forgiveness, reconciliation, and unity among populations which have been the victimizers or the victims of the systematic and episode attributes of structurally as well as coarsely divided communities and societies. What this means is that at best, in educational sectors of historically divided societies, be they racial, gender, class, or caste-based, education policymakers are content with having students and their staffs and administrators learn how to reconcile just if they want to as volunteers, such as organizing friendship and reconciliation clubs. This may be helpful to the good-hearted and well-intended people who come and participate, but what about those who prefer not to come? Those who think they can afford to ignore the humanity of blacks, ignore the humanity of those who live in the favela, in the poor black and brown inner cities, and the forgotten rural lands of indigenous people. Those who avoid with all their might coming to terms with their own racism and their own sexism. Those who are thus more than likely are much in critical need to learn how to be open. What this means is that if we are really talking about genuine uses of VTE like traditional education means, to bring about effective human rights consciousness and policies among those who administer, teach, and are taught? How can we develop methods where everyone in the course of their teaching and their learning experience on the way to technical certification has to begin as an institutional requirement with the same courses and the same emerging experiences and the same practical degree and certification processes regarding reconciliation and living together as human beings should, and seeing each other and embracing each other as equal human beings, thus deserving of respect and dignity as critical life skills, just as important as skills having to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic. How can this become a reality in how students are taught and teachers teach real-life skills in Brazil, as well as in the United States and other places where race walks as a silent and not too silent dehumanizing monster? How do we go about making sure that everybody in an institution learns about the history of race, the history of the favela, the history of the ghetto, the history of the caste system in India, the history of the distance between the rich and the poor, often with hidden racialized dimensions, or in the case of my present work, the history of the Hutu extremist apartheid genocidal state, which caused a genocide against the Tutsis, or the origins of the untouchables in India, or of slavery in Brazil and the United States, the history of apartheid in South Africa, anti-Aboriginal racism in Australia, with an eye on making sure that teachers and students remain aware that learning